Good morning. This has been quite a calamitous start. We've had problems with the sound. We've had problems with making people co-hosts, but welcome to Ajay and Rollo, who have kindly agreed to do this webinar. And it's a reprise of their paper, award-winning paper at the ESOMAR Congress last year. I'm going to pass it over to them. All I'm going to say is, please, if you've got any questions, put them in, and I think we'll go back to them again at the end. And apologies for losing the sound. Anyway, hey ho, off you go.
I'm going to try to share my screen. Do let me know if you can see it, and we'll get started right away. Whilst the deck is coming up, I'll just do a very brief introduction. Both Rollo and I work with Ipsos. We're part of the global qualitative team, and our role is to try to solve client business problems and look at new and innovative ways to do them. So, the two of us are not just colleagues, but we're also good friends. In fact, we have a third, and that's Jim Legg. Now, Jim couldn't be with us on this particular call, and he sends his apologies. I'm going to do my very best to try to channel my inner Jim and take you through that story. So the three of us, as I said, are not just colleagues, but also great friends. And on a fishing trip to Panama, we started to enjoy ourselves over a lazy conversation, and we started to talk about bigger things that were impacting the research industry, things that everyone was talking about, such as AI. Now, some see generative AI as a blessing that can free researchers from boring tasks, whilst others think it could lead to the loss of the qualitative craft. And just like the audience, the three of us didn't agree on the role of AI either. We knew that we had to leave aside our personal biases and study this issue with a beginner's mind. That's where we let our 6-year-olds emerge. We began to speculate these wondrous what if scenarios. What could actually happen if AI starts to work in the context of qualitative research? Is it only for monotonous tasks? Are humans reduced to clicking on those recaptures? And what's the role of the environment? The idea of an AI bot leading a focus group in the metaverse with synthetic respondents might sound like it's an opening line of a far-fetched joke, or is it closer to reality? Now, these sort of questions completely blew our mind, and we thought we need to do something to dissect the role of AI and how it could add value to the qualitative research process. We started to come about a process where we could take a look at doing some research on research. We looked at embarking on this journey, all while asking the question, does AI foster greater empathy or leave us feeling empty? And to investigate this, we looked at 3 self-funded studies where we altered one variable in the qualitative research process. In the first study, we had a AI moderator bot powered by GenAI. This is a study that was conducted in the US. In the last one, we had swapped out human respondents for synthetic respondents. And this was a study that was conducted in Japan. And in the middle, we had a study where we spoke to 2 humans, a moderator and a respondent, but we conducted this interview in various virtual environments, moving from face-to-face to all the way to immersive VR. And as we reflected and assessed these issues, we tried to answer this question of empathy as such, and does it really help? Now, when we start to think about empathy, it's rather difficult to define. It usually involves some sort of a metaphor of walking in someone else's shoes. And whilst that's fabulous, it doesn't really give you a clear set of assessment criteria. How exactly do we go about this process? So to do this, we used Amy Copeland's framework for empathy. And here she talked about three distinct issues. The first is that of affective matching, which is, would the AI moderator be able to recognize and mirror the respondent's emotions to build rapport? We also then had the second criteria, which was other oriented perspective taking. Would it be able to understand someone else's thoughts and look at it without judgment? Would the AI moderator, just like a human, be able to probe to uncover the true perspective? And the last is self other differentiation. Would the moderator bot keep in mind that it has a job to do? It has to answer a research and business objective. Would it be able to do that aspect as well? So we looked at using a GPT-4o model to power a moderator bot, and we used the voice function to conduct these verbal interviews. In the US, we spoke to respondents about their streaming platform viewing habits, such as what were they watching on Netflix and Prime and how they made these decisions, etc., about their habits and preferences. And post the interview with the bot, a human moderator followed up with the respondent and asked them what their experience was like. So, what did we find? Well, the first thing that we found is post some of the initial technical difficulties, just like we're having right now in terms of getting our video to you, we realized that the AI moderator bot performed surprisingly well. It had this wondrous ability to look at specific details from the television shows, the episode titles, the storylines, and it reflected those in the conversation. It made the respondents feel heard and validated, especially when you compare it against a untrained moderator. Now, you'll be able to see what happened on the next slide where I try to speak to the bot itself. And you may not be able to hear the audio, but I'll talk over it. You'll be able to see the subtitles to the video itself. Now, as a sci-fi enthusiast, I loved talking to the bot about my love for Star Trek and Star Wars, and it was able to pick up aspects such as my favorite show, Mirror Mirror. It could identify my emotion, and it even complimented me on my t-shirt. And that clearly made me smile. Now, but what it didn't do was it didn't delve into the reasons behind my love for optimistic sci-fi. It didn't delve into why exactly I loved it, what exactly I loved about it, and how this impacted me. It acknowledged my emotion, excitement, but moved on very swiftly, and at best was like an affective skim. Well, the moderator bot also struggled for meaningful improvisation and real time adaptation. Just like a human moderator has this intuitive ability to go off script, to smell out what is insightful and helpful in answering the research objectives. Now, losing this ability could lead to, heard them before, generic sort of responses. For example, some of our respondents talked about the fact that they relied on word of mouth from friends or from social media to find shows that were hot, instead of just taking a look at the shows that were recommended to them by the platform. Now, the AI moderator bot didn't dig into what was the reason behind this and what the platform could do to tweak this experience itself. Now, very much like when you're hanging out with your friends, experienced moderators have the ability to use nods and emphatic cues such as ahs and ums to make eye contact and to signal to the respondent that they actually want a deeper answer. This leverages an unwritten social contract. Just like when you're hanging out with your friends and you hold out your fist right in front of them, you're expecting a fist bump just like Rollo has obliged. It's this aspect that the moderator bot obviously couldn't mimic. And so what it ends up doing is behaving in some cases like a very novice moderator, someone who's quite junior, who spends a lot of time looking down at the discussion guide, as a result of which misses out on the prize right in front of it. It misses out on those fertile opportunities to probe, to dig deeper, to deal with those novel and unexpected insights. And so it's fair to say that the AI moderator bot won't be replacing your favorite human moderator just as yet, but you can use it for a couple of use cases. The first is always on access. Imagine speaking to a bot during times where the human interaction just isn't practical. When you're experiencing pain and you're trying to study this, and unfortunately the respondent is having a migraine attack at 3 a.m., it's almost impossible to collect responses because the moderator isn't around. A bot could potentially help. You could look at scale and speed as well. So imagine a set of fleet of these bots conducting numerous interviews to cut down time. You could also look at conversational quant surveys, follow-up probes on those open-endeds, as well as an engagement tool when you're doing long-term digital communities as such. And by acknowledging what the participant has said, you can keep that conversation going. But keep in mind, it's better than what we have today, but it ain't exactly qual. Rollo, tell us a little bit more about virtual environments.
Thank you much. Thank you very much, Ajay. So we're on this boat fishing in the middle of the Panamanian jungle, and we started to talk about other forms of tech. One form of tech that had us all enthralled before AI eclipsed it was virtual reality, or mixed reality to be more precise. So we asked ourselves the question, what happens when you put people in the virtuality spectrum, and what happens if you make them anonymous? So it's a fairly robust study that we did here. We did 8 discussion groups in total, 2 in each of 4 different mediums. So on the left-hand side of the spectrum was traditional face-to-face. Then we did traditional video online, a bit like this, with 2 of those groups as well. Then we did desktop VR, 2 groups in that. And then lastly, we did immersive VR. So the difference between desktop and immersive is effectively with immersive, you're wearing a headset. And if you've ever experienced wearing a headset, you know how different it feels. And some of the platforms now have very good ways of making you feel like you're really in the room with different people. So really interestingly, one of the first things we found with this is that mixed reality, it offers us an extraordinary medium for research, especially in Qual. So essentially, it's a limitless array of co-creation tools inside an infinitely customizable environment. So for Qualitative, obviously, there's tons of things that we can play with in that. It's a really good playground for Qual specifically. You're able to take any kind of assets in any kind of scenario. And when the tech becomes more user-friendly, because it's not very user-friendly now, and the Gen AI tools are built into that a bit more seamlessly, mixed reality is really going to change the way that we do Qual. So the other thing that's really interesting we found is that it tracks different people into the research environment that we don't normally get. So we know not everyone wants to take part in research, but not everyone can take part either. So people, for example, who are differently abled, they rarely take part in discussion-based activities in Qual, yet their experiences can prove completely invaluable, but they just don't come into that research environment. So in a way, mixed reality spaces brings new people into research. From what Ajay has written in another paper with our colleague April, has termed the vibrant fringes. And when we talk about the vibrant fringes, it's really those edges of society that we don't always come in contact to beyond the mainstream that really add value to what we do in Qual. The other thing that's really strikes you when you're first doing research within these virtual environments is that immersing respondents into mixed reality, which is effectively a gaming environment, is that it instantly taps into people's play mode. And that in Qual is brilliant because it opens up their creativity, their imagination. And that is really, really good for Qual. But you have to manage that dynamic. So you'll see in this next video, we had one respondent called Giraffe. This guy, he bounced around for 2 hours in the group. He never stopped bouncing. He's just endlessly doing it. You're in some deep, meaningful conversation and out come the dance moves. So it can be really distracting and there's mayhem that happens in the first of those. So it's much better when you've got people who are used to those environments. I mean, Ajay and I, we spent a lot of time a couple of years ago just flying around these things because it's just simply so much fun. So the beauty of that is it really taps into that play mode for Qual. Really, really good to tap into that play mode. Now we call him Giraffe because essentially everyone in that research is anonymous. So everyone is completely anonymous. So we give them fake names. But anonymity is a spectrum. It's not an on and off switch. So in virtual reality and mixed reality, you dress up in any avatar that you want. And you essentially can be anyone you want to be. What's really interesting for us in Qualitative is that slow release of the true identity. And that can be really, really revealing. So we talk about, even when people lie, they tell you the truth. They tell you a truth. And in Qual, there are layers of truth. And as we unravel each layer, it tells us a story. We often talk about the real self, who we really are, and then the projected self is how we want others to see us. But that projected self, it's a goldmine of tensions and aspirations and something that we can really tap into in our virtual world. So anonymity in this respect, it really has value in research for understanding that projected self, but less so for the real world behavior of the real self. So in a way, it helps us understand what could be rather than what is. But there's tension here between anonymity and authentic self-expression. So, for example, anonymity can empower vulnerable people by making them feel safe. It provides a really good way of discussing sensitive topics that people don't normally want to talk about face-to-face in real world. And it helps us find new perspectives that we couldn't find before. Lots of the women in the research, so obviously discussed this in all the age groups across the different mediums. Lots of women talked about misogyny, especially in the gaming space. So they often had names and avatars that were gender neutral, or they just simply pretended to be a man. But that pretense is not authentically them, nor is it their projected self. So there is this kind of tension between that anonymity. On the other hand, there's this wonderful freedom of expression. You've got the ability here. So I've just lost my video here a bit. Just going to come back to you. There you are. In here, you'll see our friend here, Giraffe. He comes back. And what he does there is essentially he comes back suddenly as a woman in this rather fetching white dress. So this is really interesting. We talked to him afterwards on a one-on-one and just said, went on full on Freud saying, hey, what's with the white dress? He said, you know what? I could, therefore I did. It was simply there available to me. I did it for a bit. I enjoyed expressing that. And then I moved on. And why not? So in a way, what do we learn from this? So there's a spectrum here of anonymity and immersiveness. On the left-hand side, it's about your physical presence and your unconscious gestures that you just can't hide. We reveal those all the time. So in a way, there's less choice, but there's less anonymity. And on the right-hand side, you've got more choice. You've got your avatar that you choose and that you choose to send to the world. And right now, still, there's lots of conscious gestures are the only ones that come through on virtual reality. And you get obviously more anonymity there. So the left-hand side, the business side, it's really good for reality, evaluation, task-based activities and understanding that real self. Whereas on the right-hand side, it's great for play. It's great for imagination, co-creativity, freedom of expression, and understanding that projected self. So Ajay, tell us about synthetic respondents.
So, Rollo, this is typically a section where we would have Jim come in and talk to us about synthetics. And so, but since he's not here, I'm going to do my very best to try to take his place and tell you a little bit more about synthetics. Now, the various approaches to creating synthetic data. There's data imputation models, there's generative adversarial networks, etc. In this case, we looked at a light version of creating a respondent bot for this particular pilot as such. What we did is tap into one of our online communities in Japan. This is a syndicated community with over 20,000 members, of which we took a smaller sample of about 150 odd respondents, and we spoke to them about their habits. These were women, and we spoke to them about their feminine health related needs as such. We could then use some of the data, for example, their demographics, their attitudes, etc., that we could take and train 150 digital twins based on the data that they shared with us itself. What this allowed us then to do by looking at their gender, age, geographic data, etc., was almost have a set of 150 digital twins as well as physical respondents. And then we did another set of questions to them. We shared another set of questions to them and almost did a parallel test to see how each of these performed. So the same set of questions were then offered to the digital twins as well as the human respondents. And then we tried to do a comparison to see how these performed. But in that context, we did a further test. We sort of looked at it and said, let's break this down into 3 subtasks, that of exploration, ideation, and evaluation, and see how these are actually performing. So let's tell you very quickly what we found. The first thing that we found is, the LLMs are basically large probability-based models. And even though you may train them with consumer data, with digital twins, what they end up doing is skewing towards the central tendency. This is something that we sort of theorized before we got in. This is something that we sort of validated during the test itself. Just because of the way that they're structured, what they start to do is give you the sort of average response, but you need more in qual. You need much more in that. What we've described in our paper is that whilst it can sort of replicate human responses to a certain degree, the responses generated by the bots lack some of the texture of a vibrant painting. They lack the color, they lack the texture, and they also sort of move towards the central tendency, as I talked about. What you would then end up missing is those nuances, those emotional nuances, those counterintuitive or complex factors that could lead to a potential insight, like aspects such as when can pain be good? Just like you have dirt is good. And how does it make the individual feel? So you could, as a respondent, as a consumption experience by looking at synthetic data, whilst you can read it, it's difficult to experience and feel it as such. What we saw is that the themes that were generated by the humans were varied in terms of number as compared to the digital twins, both in the context of evaluation as well as in the context of exploration as such. And so what it basically ends up doing very quickly is leave you feeling a little empty, not a whole lot of empathy, because it tends to look at purely the broader symptoms, the central tendency, a very high level approach, the lack of granularity in terms of the responses that you end up getting as such. It lacks that depth, the color, the texture. What about when it comes to ideation? Well, this is where the bots tend to shine. This is where the bots have done a fairly good job in terms of creating new ideas as such. But let me clarify what I mean there. What they have is a wondrous ability to connect various types of information and create a strong set of reasons to believe. The humans, when we got them to do the same exercise, came up with three, four, perhaps five potential reasons to believe for the benefits that they sought. But with the bots, were able to create more of those. But having said that, what the bots tend to do is gravitate more towards solving the pain rather than the person. They tend to stress more on logic than on magic. And this is where you need the human to assist. This is where you need the human to help with stretching the boundaries of what can be achieved in the context of ideation. Now, there are a lot of potential applications to use it for ideation. Our belief is that could you use generative AI in the context of helping you to reframe the issues, working with the clients and the researchers in the context of supercharging your divergent thinking abilities and therefore helping you to overcome the barrier of fixedness or familiarity because it draws from multiple sources. And also, could it be your personal copywriter in your pocket and help you to overcome the barrier of fear, something that you would take while you're writing things down itself? So, what did we learn from these three experiments? Rollo?
Thank you, Ajay. So what we're trying essentially to do with the three studies, there's three things we did. There's the moderator, the setting, and the respondents, which are the kind of pillars of qualitative research. We wanted really to kind of temper our instinctive enthusiasm for the new tech, AI, VR, and all the rest of it, with some firm evidence and some understanding, some scientific understanding. For sure, AI opens up these new opportunities that Ajay is talking about, in new case studies, but right now it lacks that nuanced understanding and the empathy that a human expert can bring to the table. Virtual environments and anonymity, it opens up the sense of freedom, creativity, and wonder, but the tech is still, it's too clunky for everyday research, to be honest, at the moment. We feel that will change, but right now it's still clunky. These technologies will combine in the future to do things that we haven't even thought about yet, but not quite yet. It's astonishing what AI can already do and how real an AI bot sounds. So we didn't have that AI bot, but I'm sure lots of you have played with them. They sound incredibly real. We're blown away by how real they actually sound. And it's amazing how convincing synthetic insight reads, but maybe we're deceived by our astonishment and we're duped into thinking that something that sounds so real really is real, and we should be cautious of simulating insight. We know that qual insight, it comes not from the respondent answering the questions, but from the moderator questioning those answers. That's the dynamic that we play with in qual, that ability to improvise, to use instinct, intuition, to pick up on unexpected threads means discovery of new unexpected territory. That's what qual's all about. So the bot, it sounds like it's listening in a really empathetic way. Ajay, I really love what you say about sci-fi, but in reality, that doesn't feed into the discussion. It doesn't change the direction of the dialogue at all. It's just a response to an answer. It doesn't question that answer to create new questions. And that's not qualitative conversation. It's essentially conversational quant. And I feel passionate we need to make that distinction to clients so they understand the difference between those two things. We have a role that's really important, that we hold on to what is magical and is a craft in qual, and we don't want that diluted by some of the wrong messages going out to clients. So don't sacrifice the fringes. So qual, it's about discovery. It's about unearthing the unseen, the unsaid, and the unheard. we look for those fringes, those edges, those individual experiences that go beyond the masses. That's the fuel to inspire our clients to be distinctive in what is an increasingly cluttered market. And that's the power of one person's story that changes the way that we see things. AI, essentially, it pulls insight into that middle ground. We shouldn't sacrifice the fringes. AI holds enormous potential for us and our industry, but it runs the danger of vanillarising insight by being applied in the wrong place at the wrong time. Ajay.
So is playtime over? Have we tempered our enthusiasm? Rollo?
No, playtime's never over. We're going to keep going. We're going to keep doing it. We certainly don't have all the answers. And in this industry, you blink and new technology advances have happened. So we're constantly playing in that. And I think as an industry, we massively need to do that.
Thank you both very much. It was fascinating. I do have one question.
Yes.
Which, before you start off, I'll jump in. Are linguistics experts being used by AI companies? Because I would have thought that could short circuit some of the problems in terms of finding out nuances, etc.
Yes, I'm sure they are. And some of the suppliers that we've spoken to also talk about, and clients as well, also talk about some of the challenges that they're facing. For example, some of the challenges come about in the context of how language itself is used, how you often have the same word, and if the context changes, the meaning changes. But more importantly, how English itself is not the same across geographies. And so if you're speaking to someone who is in the UK versus in India versus in Singapore, the usage of English changes dramatically. More importantly, this also changes with regards to the generation that one is looking at. I'm sure there are loads and loads of videos that people have watched on TikTok where kids are using language like skibbity and other such words which I'm far too old to use. And so the complexity of the situation is profound, but things are changing very rapidly. One of the things that we often talk about at Ipsos is the problems that we faced 12 hours back are not the same that we're grappling with now. So you should take a look at what we're presenting pretty much as something which is a point in time, and things could move very differently, but we're not there yet.
Well, I study linguistics myself, so it's something passionate to my heart. The AI companies have their own agendas, and what they develop and then what we have in our own sandpits are two different things. So what we might create for you, clients, different things, we're able to actually have our input within that. Whereas the AI companies, they, as you've seen in the press, has their own biases and everything else in there as well. So there is a role for us at each different level, and as the end researcher playing with that as well. Ajay, would you agree with that? Okay, so one of the questions we got here, is there a way we can get to play with VR AI and see how it could be used? Absolutely, Corinne. So the ones that we used in this, some ones that we tend to use most of is workrooms, and the other one is spatial. Spatial and workrooms, I think you can both have free accounts in that and just set it up and play. I've got my headset somewhere here. There's also desktop versions that you can do without that. I would have a play with the difference, especially with a headset. If you have the headset version, I mean, Ajay and I are always amazed by if we're in the same room and I lean towards Ajay and speak, my voice gets louder. So it feels like you're really there. And that's interesting for the nonverbal cues, all the other things that we as qualies pick up on, but also how we play with that dynamic in the room. So I definitely please have a play with that. Even Teams has a virtual avatar, skin that you can do on. If you go into the Teams setting, you'll see there's an avatar setting. So you can do that. We've done quite a lot of research with, things like, for example, healthcare. Men often don't want to talk about certain types of healthcare. Debt. We've done some individual depth interviews for a bank where we made everyone anonymous. So you sit down in a nice bank environment, but I don't know who that person is. They don't know who I am, and then we talk. Now, obviously, in the UK, everyone knows everything about you the millisecond you open your mouth, because that's that's language and culture so mixed together. But you to get beyond that, to talk about sensitive topics, definitely have a play with that. I think there's lots. It's very underused in research, I feel. Cara has said, what is involved with building a VR playground, design skills, who, time, cost? Great question. So you can do lots of these things fairly basically. So for example, I've done a few, and I'm absolutely incompetent at tech, even though I work in innovation. Ajay's always laughing at me. I can't even work my iPhone. I was able to make some virtual environments in spatial. There are templates that you can do. So I would go on there and just steal someone else's template. What takes the time is building the assets inside those things. So your scenario and your setting and your environment is one thing, but if you're going to test stimulus, or if you're going to immerse people in the world of what's it like to be a Gen Z, organics person, whatever, you can build that world within those environments. But it takes as much time as it does manually putting up on a wall in a house. So it does take time. There are obviously agencies and companies that do this for you. And the holy grail for us is the co-creation of assets within a virtual environment. So if I could get, this crappy mouse and I want to redesign it in a 3D environment with designers in there from anyone around the world, plus consumers, et cetera, now it's clunky to do that, but in the future we'll be able to do that with AI a lot more easier. So that will completely change the way that we do co-creation. Kevin asked, what would you not research using mixed reality methods? I think you, and some of you are also talking about this further down, when you're talking about real reality situations, task-based activities, it's not so easy to do that. You're better at that projected self, that creative side of what people want to be. You're not really looking at I am who I am. I mean, this is an interesting, I could talk about this for hours. In research, we invite people into a very unnatural and artificial environment. We say, open up your tensions, fears, and aspirations to me and a bunch of strangers in the next, 2 hours who you've never met before. So it is a leap anyway. So we're always playing with that interpretation of what people are really thinking and what they're actually saying. And that dynamic between the two is where the insight lies. But I would definitely go for I would use it as an add-on. So you do lots of essential basic qual that you might do in your different formats, but you might add this on as something different to look to see what's on the other side of the island that you might not get the glimpse of if you'd not normally do. And be transparent with your clients if that's what you're doing.
If I could just build onto that, Rollo.
Yeah, go ahead.
What this doesn't help you to do is look at gaps between what is verbalized and what is actually done, because you're not really taking a look at the real environment as well. So if you're looking at any sort of exercise when you're trying to identify those gaps, this is not the right methodology. Perhaps an observation-based methodology would work better.
Yeah, absolutely. Well put. Kevin says, to what extent are people being themselves, or does that not matter? Maybe the wrong question. It's really interesting, isn't it? It's a bit like when you look at social media posts and you're trying to understand, are people projecting an image they want to come across? When they do that, that holds a lot of value for us in Qual. People are always playing with, who they want to be and who they really are. And I think that journey from one to the other is often very revealing for us in terms of insight. I would say that in some responses, definitely when it's on a one-on-one environment, people are able to be themselves. I think it's very good. And when you hear lots of people, having therapy and stuff like that in an anonymous environment, it does let go of some of the baggage that we hold on in our physical presence. And that can be really revealing on a one-on-one. I would say people play the game more when you're in a group environment, as they do normally. Get any bunch of people together, you'll get the clown, you'll get the joker, you'll get the serious, you'll get the doer. People tend to morph into roles in a generative environment. And I think they do that a bit within that as well. It is really hard to manage. I will be honest with you. It's really difficult to manage as a moderator because and also to answer some of the other questions, you're starting from scratch from someone, you know nothing about them. So we as moderators, we didn't even talk to the recruiters about who these people were. It's just you and them. And that's really tough, actually. That's a really tough thing to do. You've got to start from scratch, build that relationship and understand who they are. with that, but people still play the games. It's also quite difficult physically to manage everything. People start wandering off, giraffe starts dancing around, people start playing with all the toys they've suddenly found. So there's a lot of management to get over. And then once you get over that, and there's a productive side, where people start coming up with the magic about 3/4 of the way through. It's a bit like a normal group or a normal any kind of discussion-based activity. Ajay, would you add to that?
That was beautiful.
Imagine it's great for people to get things out of their head, think outside the box. Absolutely, go beyond yourself for a bit. Really good for getting that extra bit of creativity. Amy says, it feels like the moderator has quite a lot of work to do to get beneath the posturing, created identities, find the underlying meaning. Absolutely. There's a lot of work there. And also, you're a bit cautious as a moderator because you don't know what to ask sometimes. Sometimes when you know more about that person, you're able to push to a certain boundary with them. But if you don't know anything about them, you've got to be a little bit careful in the world of that. And we live in a very judgmental society. Let's not pretend we don't. So that can be tricky to do that. One for you, Ajay. Kevin's asking, do synthetic bots or twins hallucinate?
So I could give you a long answer and a short answer. The short answer is yes. And so you sort of just need to be cautious in terms of how are you using this and what are you using it for. So the way the various ways that you could try to reduce the amount of hallucination, and one of the ways is using retrieval augmented generation as such, where you're tapping into a large database, and the large language model visits that database to retrieve the answers before it's providing you those. It's very difficult to do when you're creating digital twins, because it's often you create digital twins in scenarios where it's very difficult to speak to actual humans. And so many a times you don't have the data to create that large augmented database itself. For example, I'd like to speak to one-eyed pirates who are left-handed. It's slightly difficult to find them, talk to them about their banking habits and how they feel about their healthcare problems and what vitamin C has done for them. So all of this is relatively difficult to do. What you are doing is using some of the data to almost sort of use the demographic attitudinal data from a syndicated study to shape a segment that you may not usually go to. We're currently doing some amount of work with a mobility provider in Europe to try to create a set of digital twins for differently abled individuals. This is a segment that the most clients wouldn't go after. And the way that we think about it is that you're usually not going to this audience anyway. With a very marginal fee, you can then get perhaps a 60-70% representation of these attitudes. But it's 70% more than nothing, right? It's not perfect. And if you do have the time, if you do have the resources, we would very strongly recommend that you speak to an actual human and use it only for specific cases as such. This method of creating synthetic data, like I said, the various other methods of using synthetic data like data imputation models, etc., which are fabulous for quantitative research methods. This is what we would do for generating text-based data.
Great answer, Ajay. Stuart's asking, if the tech is clunky, wouldn't we be better off using existing sandboxes like Roblox or even Fortnite? Absolutely. And actually, so we do a lot of, what's it called, ethnography and all that stuff, where we go into people's world to research them in their world. And we do quite a lot of that cultural analysis within, for example, Roblox is, it's massive, that's huge. And there's different, as Ajay was hinting before, there's cultural differences in regions, in tribes, and generations of people who use a lot of these different things. I would say that the gaming world has massive potential for us in qualitative research. So we're working with a few suppliers now about creating some of those decision matrix, those those worlds that are incredibly familiar to gamers and are completely foreign to, if you're not a gamer, then it means nothing to you. So definitely, and I would say as a general thing, always research people in their world rather than bring them into yours. But there's more personalization and tools you can play in some of the other ones is the only thing I would say on that. But yeah, it's a good question. Corinne saying, humans are amazing at creating virtual settings in our head when we read or listen to radio, which is cheap and easy to access. Is this really a great deal better than this? Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. And I do think there's a lot of literature now about when you read, it's different when you have a podcast and when you're reading an audio book. And also the difference between the different senses and how that stimulates the brain in a different way. I would say it's just another way of doing it, of stimulating people. We've done some studies where people sip champagne, and we know that if you put them in, they're on the south of France on a beach, it tastes better than if you're sitting in a room in Slough, for example. Nothing against Slough. I know some Slough. Slough's absolutely beautiful, and I really love it. It's just not as nice as the south of France. There are AI tools that out there that specialize in pick up in motion in the extent they can diagnose apparent mental health conditions. Depression. Was the chatbot you used trained on emotion, Ajay?
So no, we didn't have a chatbot that was specifically trained on picking up emotions. Now there's also some amount of legality involved here, because as we look at various generative AI models, different regions of the world are sort of looking at different sort of rules and regulations to figure out is it ethical or unethical for a AI bot to pick up on those emotions as such. Some regions don't have a very strong regulation. Others do. In this case, we sort of looked at pretty much using the existing LLMs. We prompt trained them in terms of how to look at potentially moderating better, how it should react better, but we didn't have a specific module on emotion.
Ajay, another one here. Fascinating presentation in terms of qualitative research. Evidencia AI in the US has written quite a lot about synthetic respondents. My question is, what do you think are the most promising opportunities from Gen AI in quantitative research, including analysis and storytelling? I'm not sure we're totally qualified to talk about our quant cousins, but definitely within analysis and storytelling. Ajay, there's another question further below as well about how we think it works in terms of analysis. So maybe we look at analysis and storytelling in that.
So I mean, our quant cousins are doing a fair bit of work on AI, and in fact, there are a couple of papers that we've published on synthetic data, which we'd be very happy to share with you as such. And in fact, they're available in the public domain, so you could search on that as well. Some of the applications have been in the context of how do we try to make sense of the open-endeds when it comes to aspects such as product testing, or in the context of concept testing itself, or looking at reactions to a piece of communication, and how could you theme them? How could you look at various dimensions to them itself? Now, when it comes to telling stories, this is again something that Rollo and I are very passionate about. And we'll just leave you with a couple of tips because the applications are amazing. You could look at it very much in the context of how could I brainstorm with a generative AI bot to try to structure my story, to try to find the right metaphor to tell my story itself. But also, there's so many models that are currently out there which help you in terms of creating a visual spectacle itself. So the amount of time, for example, on this presentation deck, it was beautiful. We had so much fun putting it together. But the amount of time that we spent just finding the right image and creating the right sort of emotion was painstaking. But the two of us often got into conversations as to, oh my gosh, we need to make sure that our bosses don't realize how much fun we're having because they could take it all away. So we could we could talk to you for hours on.
And actually, I
storytelling.
think it is a great storytelling tool. And Ajay's being very modest. He came up with all those videos, all the images and videos for this presentation, as he does for everything. And he's able to get that level of extra amazingness. It's good, you know, it's easy to make something look good, but it's very difficult to make something look great. And Ajay has that, and that's, you know, hours and hours and hours of perfecting his prompts, something which I haven't done. So Amy Thompson, hopefully that's the Amy Thompson I know and love. Hello, Amy, if it's you. What's your POV on AI being used within qual analysis? I think we've talked about that a little bit already, about that heavy lifting, doing the things that we don't want to do faster, quicker. I also think I don't know what you think, Ajay, it is able to sometimes uncover themes that we may not have seen ourselves, and more themes than we might have seen, and overcomes personal bias. Of course, it has its own bias too, but I think it has that as well. So just jump forward here. There's an interesting one from Linda. I'm curious about ethics and safety of respondents in immersive VR. I found Giraffe changing their avatar and personality deeply troubling. Two presidents, lots to think about. It is troubling, and I was troubled by Giraffe. Giraffe is quite a complex person, actually, in lots of ways, not just that. I would say, though, Giraffe was playing rather than expressing some, you know, in a trauma or something. But other people were gender neutral in their life. They were all transitioning, and they talked about that within the environment, and it was incredibly moving, and it was difficult to navigate. But I do felt it gave them a different, not saying a better or different, but a different setting and environment to express who they were in their own journey. And that's a complex journey, and it is complex. But yeah, there aren't any ethics around like this, and all new tech, there's no ethics anywhere. It's an ethicless world, new tech. Look at the tech bros who, you know, were at the organ inauguration the other day. You know, ethics are not going to be found there. So we have to create ethics around that ourselves. Absolutely, 100%. And we're Ipsos, so we have to cover our backs on that. And we were very, very careful about all those things. But it will bring up troubling stuff, actually. And maybe we should, you know, be more open to some of the questions we don't want to answer in qualitative research, and nor do our clients. Maybe there's more troubling things that we could go in there. But I found it troubling too. No, 100%, I'm with you on that one. Jonathan says, how are we doing time? Might be interesting to create and stimulate situations where you put people into and see what they say and how they would behave. Absolutely. I think in a way it's an extension of behavioral science interventions. What happens when I put people in this? So one is for them to go on their own kind of journey. Do they go left or do they go right? But also, what happens if I put this person who wants to go left and I'm going to make them go right? Then definitely there's a lot to play with in that. That's why I think that idea of play, being a bit more gamified, having a bit more fun in research is good. You know, that's been a challenge from our founder of Ipsos. Actually, he said, you know, you've got to make research more interesting. People are not, you know, 15-year-old kids, they ain't going to go and do an hour survey. They're just not going to do it. So we need more interesting ways to connect with them. Hello, Annabelle Phillips. Lovely to hear from you as well, my dear. If you have to use checks and balances for the AI twins to see how it varies, A, how long will it be until it mirrors individual scenarios, if ever? And B, is it really worth it? And which approach is more expensive?
I wish I knew the answer to that. So the way that we're sort of looking at it in this particular exercise, what we did was sort of did a pretty much a parallel test. So we could sort of look at the what the twins created and what the humans created. And I feel that it sort of comes down to what is it that you're looking for. Would I recommend to a client that you need to take a look at 100% synthetic sample? No, I would never do that, for at least not for now, right? And the reason is because in my understanding, in our understanding, 70-80% of what the human says is still not sufficient, because as Rollo said in the presentation, great insight doesn't come from understanding the 80% that everybody already knows. It comes from that 5% that hasn't been discussed as yet. And so the twins would be able to represent a segment that it's difficult to research, it's difficult to access as a human, right? You may not be able to go after a set of differently abled individuals in your panel. If you can, please do speak to a human. You would get richer responses. Our thought around this is that would I use a synthetic respondent or synthetic bot as we've created for evaluation? No, it's far too complex, right? The reactions to the stimulus, the cultural aspects are far too complex. Most of these large language models are trained on weird data, right? So it's Western, educated, etc. It's the democratic nations itself, but there's so much more diversity in the world, which is often not captured in the training data of the large language models, right? And so we sort of looked at this pretty much as, should we go in this area or not? And at this stage, we think that it makes sense for specific type of applications, but not for everything. It would help to use a bot for ideation with a human, but I wouldn't use it for evaluation just as yet. Now, there are other ways that you could use synthetic data and artificial intelligence for evaluation as well. But I wouldn't use a large language model to do that. So we're not saying that all AI is not the right tool. This application is not the right way. So I wouldn't subject it to a large language model and expect it to evaluate great stimulus.
And I would add to that, especially as this is a qualitative forum, in essence, I feel, without being defensive, what we don't want to feel is we're, I'm an old bloke who's into my career and I'm defensive about AI coming in. But I do feel passionate that qualitative plays a significant role in our clients' work. And I feel that could very easily be diluted if we don't talk to our clients about when to use AI in the right place and when not. And also makes a mockery of everything we've done in the last, 50 years of developing this craft. If AI just wipes it out in one go, I feel clients are not sure when to use it, and it's our we need to defend our craft and make it applied in the right places to add the value that we know it does, without appearing to be too defensive on that. And I think that's the difference between what Ajay coined quantitative conversation is different than qualitative conversation. What quant does is it does box by box by box by box. It has questions within that box and it goes to another one. What qual does is it creates new boxes. And that going off, using your intuition, inspiration, finding new territories, that's where the magic happens. And AI is rubbing off all those corners of the world, and the corners is where the edges are, and that's where the magic is. And it's our job, I feel, to protect that. Otherwise, we're going to get bland insight that does nothing for our clients. Just, Lorella, to your last question, do you think there'll be a consumer backlash against the amount of water needed to be used by AI? Absolutely. And I hope this is a massive backlash. It's been used ridiculously left, right, and centered for totally airhead things like selfies being shared for nothing and all the rest of it. So it's part of that thing. We should have a massive consumer backlash against it. I feel passionately about that. Anyway.
I'm not sure whether you covered all the questions, but if not, I might send them round to you. And if you want to answer them by email, that's fine. Thank you both very much. I think I also ought to say that for AQR members, there's an interview with Ajay on this particular topic in the next issue of Curious, which should go out this week as well. But thank you both very much, very, very much. I look forward to hearing about the ethics of this and what's going to be done to instill them in there. So,
100%.
hey ho.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us, Rollo. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.